Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, ships at sea, it is time for yet another episode of Property of the Week with PropertyLens. As always, for those of you who don't know, I am Bob Frady, co-founder and CEO of PropertyLens. With me, as always,
John Siegman, president and co-founder of PropertyLens.
For those of you who are on the U-Face down there, click the subscribe button. It makes us feel better when you do that. It really, because that's all we're in this for, is feeling better about ourselves. We have a very special guest today, Mr. Alan Danielson, who is the founder of the Quantum Funding Company, joining us from just outside of Fort Worth, Texas. Alan, give us a little overview. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I grew up in this southwest part of the country, and my mom was from Fort Worth, so I kind of grew up here, but I've lived in other places, traveled all over the United States, and now I'm back. And since coming back, started my new company here, the Quantum Funding Company. And our mission as a company is to reduce the barriers to financial barriers, specifically to real estate investing success. And so what I do is I work specifically with real estate investors on funding their deals because the first and biggest obstacle to real estate investing is, where do I find the money? The second one is, how do I succeed at REI without having to spend a ton of money on training? And so my company does something a little bit unusual. I've been advised against this by quite a few people, but either I'm dumb or I just am stubborn. I don't know. I'd like to think I'm generous. At the end of the day, though, we offer free consulting for our REI clients. Now, there is a catch. They have to sign up, sign a contract to be a client, and to say that, you know, after you've consulted us and trained us and help us to get ready for getting a loan and get ready for finding off-market properties and all of the ins and outs of success in REI, then yes, we're going to use you to get loans. And it's not an exclusive contract forever. There is a time limit on it, but you know, we've got to make a living, and so we don't want to just invest time in people who are simply wanting to learn something for free and you know, run away. So that's how we're wired. A little bit different. I also don't do a ton of traditional marketing. Instead, I hire real estate agents who specifically focus on real estate investing clients, and then pay them a generous commission for bringing their clients to me to get loans. So I get experienced clients through my realtors, and then I call them Quantum REI specialists. And then I get my newer clients from people who are interested in learning the business. So that's a little bit about us.
So are you nationwide? You operate just in Texas? Where's your footprint?
We operate in 45 states, 37 of them really easily. There's no licensing or anything like that. And then there's a map on my website, quantumfunding.co. You can look on there and see which state that you're in and if it's one that we can easily work with.
So you did say dumb and stubborn. John and I have made a career of both of those things, so you're among friends on this particular podcast. So normally what we do is we take a piece of property, we run a PropertyLens report, and then we walk through it to say, what can the PropertyLens tell me about a specific property?
Okay.
Normally you come to the site, you type it in, but what we've done is we've run it beforehand.
Yeah.
It's 255 Turner Avenue in Roanoke, Texas. And it looks like it's a commercial property or a multifamily property, apartment building, because it doesn't have specific characteristics about this unit. Here's what happens is when you type in an address to PropertyLens, first of all, we show you a picture to make sure it's the right place. Then you buy the report, and we send out all of our workers, our digital workers, to go gather data, bring it all back together. We run it through a bunch of rules. We run it through a bunch of AI, and we present it in the PropertyLens report to give you some idea of what to look for at this property before you even walk in the door.
Gotcha.
So the first thing we do is we give you our PropertyLens insights. In the buyer lens, in this case, the first thing that we do is give you an idea of what you might be spending in the next couple of years on repairs for this location. And the reason why we did that is because the number one reason why people are unhappy with their real estate transactions is unexpected expenses in the first couple of years of ownership. So we try to cover that base. And the people who publish that, the National Association of Realtors. So
Okay.
even realtors know that that's a real problem for folks. So what we have take a look at here is we don't know a lot about the underlying systems, whether
Right.
it's because permits aren't required or because it's not described in the listing. These are things, everything in this location is a flag
Okay.
because there's not a lot of information about this particular location. So your pipes, your plumbing fixtures, your sewer line are all things that you're probably going to end up spending money on because there's no report of improvements on those in
I
this
see.
location. And you add it all up, it's between $44,000 and $217,000 in repairs. So it's not necessarily an inexpensive repair. Now, if you're lucky, it's lower than this number. But if
Right.
you're not so lucky, it's closer to this number. And
Gotcha.
that gets people into a lot of problems. John, what do we see in the buyer lens?
What we see in the buyer lens is all of the other things that you need to be aware of. So, this property gets pelted. There's just no way around it. It's Texas. They have hail. So hail events, wind events, both of which can be non-events as far as the property is concerned, but a lot of times they turn into major repairs.
Now, inside of each event or each element, we show you a series of questions to ask. Because listen, you might love a property. You fall in love with a location a lot of times and you want to know, how do I protect myself? These are the questions that you should ask.
Right.
It looks like it's been damaged in hail before.
Mm.
Does the seller know anything about that? What was the extent of the damage? Has it been repaired? When's the last time the roof was replaced? All of the questions that you should be able to walk in and ask comfortably, because this is what the data tells you that this house is at risk for.
Yeah.
And if you want to, you can hand these questions to your inspector, begrudgingly sometimes, but say, make sure you check these things out.
Okay.
Look for specific signs of hail damage that you might otherwise not see.
I see.
Because it's like, you go to the refrigerator and you open it up and someone says, what are you looking for? And you're like, I don't know, but I'll know it when I see it.
Yeah.
We don't want that.
That's
You
for
want to go
sure.
looking for the celery or something or
That's
whatever,
right.
the brisket. Yeah, in Texas, you want the brisket. So
Yeah, for
go
sure.
get the brisket in the fridge.
Well, we talked about, you've got tornadoes. Those go along with hail. There's probably some lightning as well. Convective storms, all of those things are associated with convective storms. And so there's some serious risk associated with all of that. Not a whole lot of surprise there. You look down, very similar to the questions that were asked before, because they're all associated with, is it going to be bad for the siding or is it going to be bad for the roof?
It's Texas. You get all sorts of fun weather in Texas.
We
As
do.
you
Last night we had tornado warnings till about midnight, and I saw a video today. I don't know if it was true. It was on social media, so until I see it on television, I'm not sure if it's accurate or not. But they said that a one touchdown in Dallas last night. I had not heard that, so I was surprised. But I would also not be surprised if it were true.
You know what Texas gets that most states don't get
What's
is
that?
cyclonic wildfire,
Oh,
which is when you get wildfire and tornado having a baby.
Mm-hmm.
It's firenado. It's
Yep.
circular tube of fire that destroys everything. It's awful.
Yep.
And it's limited to Texas and maybe a little bit of Kansas, Oklahoma.
Yep.
But it's crazy stuff. So we also see some risk for toxic exposure. And now we're getting into the realm of things that an inspector never tells you.
Okay.
Because this is not what an inspector does.
Right.
They run the switches to make sure it works. There's a lot of PFAS contamination in this area. So you want to make sure that you do a water check. Now, municipalities are supposed to filter this stuff out, but you still want to run a check for the water in this location to see if there's any contamination in that water.
Okay.
And if there is, find if there's a filtration system on that
Gotcha.
location. Got a little bit of risk of crime in this location. Is there a security system? the roof looks in pretty good condition. So it may not be as old as we think,
Right.
because the condition is pretty good.
Okay.
So now we look at insurance, and this is a tough one for this particular location because we're looking for a single unit inside of the larger structure. So the insurance should be relatively small cost, but the replacement cost would be for the entire structure and not just because you can't just rebuild one unit. You're looking at the whole structure.
This particular building or apartment complex is one that a client of mine is looking at. It's several smaller buildings. My guess is that this is one of the probably 4 or 8 unit buildings. And then there's another one next to it, another one next to it, and so on and so forth. Would the best way to analyze this with my client be to extrapolate these numbers based on the square footage of the entire property, just the apartments, or the square footage of all the land? How would you suggest I go about that?
The first thing you'd want to find out is, are all of the buildings underneath the 255 Turner Avenue address?
Okay,
Because a lot of times each complex will have its own address.
I got you.
So you might have 5 buildings on the property and there are 5 different addresses,
Okay,
because then in that case, you'd want to run 5 reports, because each report is going to be specific to that location. Now, some things are going to be consistent across the locations. Crime's not going to
okay,
change any. Flood, however, could change dramatically from one end of the complex to the other.
I see.
But something like a tornado, if one side of the complex is exposed, the other side is.
Right.
So, but each one of those, and then, roof updates could be totally different for each building.
Okay.
So the roof condition could be different. The permits associated with the buildings could be different.
One of them might have burned
So
down and been rebuilt, that kind of
correct.
thing.
And
Okay.
so for each one of those instances, you'd want to have an address specific report.
Okay. That's really good to know. That's helpful.
The interesting thing that's going on in Texas is the changeover in roof replacements.
Okay.
As of, I think, the beginning of this year, a roof coverage switches from replacement cost to actual cash value after only 7 years in Texas.
Okay.
So if the roof is more than 7 years old,
Mhm.
it declines over time in terms of how much you're going to get back in the
Right.
event of damage. So you want to make sure you know exactly how old the roof is on this location,
I see.
because right now we're not getting great signals about exactly how old it is. Because if you look here at the damaging events, we go back to 2011 and there's 3-inch hail. Now,
Right.
3-inch hail is pretty big. 90% probability that the roof was totaled in this. And if it wasn't, then it's probably damaged. And
Mm.
you want to find out more about this roof because it'll be a possible expensive fix. The last big event we had was 2023, 3.25-inch hail. And then 2024, 2.5 inches, lots and lots of hail at this location. This is more than most places get. So looking at all of this, there's a lot of wear and tear on that roof.
Yeah.
Now we can go back in time and look at different properties. So we go back to 21 and we can see it looks like it's the same roof. So
Gotcha.
very similar. The tree's bigger, but which has its own danger with the overhang issue.
For sure.
We estimate that it's 1 year old.
Okay.
It's 25 years remaining in life, so 26-year span in Texas. But it's an expensive fix. It's a $50,000 fix.
Okay.
Yeah. To rerun that roof. It's in really good condition. It's got medium risk of exposure, primarily from tornado and hail. It's got some tree overhang, which is, all things that you would look for. Soil types are fine. Lots and lots of data about the property itself. And this is really for, I hate to call it the data nerds in the crowd, but some people really like to know everything they can find out about the property. This is the part of the property that's for them, to really say, this is 50 pages, you're tired, you want to go in here, you want to circle things, you want to understand everything that you can about the property. Now, what do we see about potential threats in structural integrity, John?
Well, you've got some soil runoff, so key to make sure that the slopes are going away from the buildings. And since there are 5 buildings there, making sure that going away from one is not pulling it toward another, 'cause that would be bad. Termites, it's the South. They happen. Probably need to, poke some pieces of wood, make sure they're not there. And if they are, tent the buildings. Water hardness, it's not hard. No mines of signs, no frost heat potential. The soil is fine. All else is pretty good as far as structural things that are going to affect the structures.
Yeah, soil runoff impacts basements or
Right.
foundations as much as anything else. So you want to make sure you take a look at the foundations for any obvious signs of damage.
Okay.
We don't have we don't have permits. The first thing we tell you in Roanoke is, are they required?
Right.
They're generally required. Texas has lax building codes,
Right.
and a lot of times you might think that it's required, but it's generally not required.
Okay.
Especially if it's like for like. But we also give you a link to the Roanoke permit department so you can see what permits are required.
I see.
And without permits, it does limit your ability to really dive deep on what's been
Right.
done,
You
which
missed
is why
out
we
on
have,
a lot of good information.
yeah, exactly. And which is why we have so many unknowns at the top of the report, which to me
Okay.
is just ask these questions because there are
Right.
no permits for this location.
Well, one of the interesting things in running this report is that we had to make up a number so it would actually run the report.
Ah,
Because it
okay.
didn't want to. So we know that there are permits associated with that location, but there are none associated with that unit, which
Right.
being an apartment totally makes sense. Where if this were a condo, it would be a little bit different, even if it was a condo with a unit number, because there may be specific permits to that unit.
Okay.
So for flood, not a big flood risk here. It's not in a 100-year zone. It's not in a 500-year zone. There's little risk of coastal flooding. Well, it's in Fort Worth, which is pretty far from the coast. And there aren't rivers nearby that could potentially flood the location. So flood insurance is not required, and we don't actually recommend flood insurance. Because in commercial policies, flood is usually part of the policy, whereas in residential policies, it's excluded. Here's the map. There's nothing to show because there's nothing around here from a flood standpoint.
I see.
The nearest zone is a half a mile away. If this was a flood zone, you can have a LOMR or a LOMA. One is by the actual homeowner, one is by the builder,
Okay.
which says that this property has been raised up. And you'll see that a lot with especially commercial properties where they're near a floodplain, but they raise the property up a foot or two.
I
And
see.
then they'll file a LOMA or a LOMR to say, we've raised this up. And you'll see it on the map. It will be an island where the house sits on. And that's something that you want to alert the consumer to say, you may not need flood insurance for the property, but you might have trouble getting to the property if the area floods because you get you get
Okay.
flood islands.
Right.
So, John, what kind of risks we got here in Texas?
Well, we've talked about it. Hail, tornado, wildfire. Texas has wildfire. We even mentioned the fire nados. There's lots of stuff in Texas that you can come up
You get
against.
ice storms and all kinds of crazy stuff here.
Yeah, you got
Just-
some winter weather
It's all
here.
there.
It's some cold. You get the cold wave. You get the heat wave. You get the double play on that one.
Yes.
Cold wave to heat wave. Ice storms. Texas had a very famous ice storm a couple of years ago where the grid fell over.
Yeah.
We don't anticipate grids falling over.
Yeah.
But now they've made that redundant, so hopefully it doesn't happen again. Not a lot of risk of sinkholes. Some parts of Texas have very high risk of sinkholes.
Okay.
You can tell when you try to dig a swimming pool and you have to go through limestone.
Oh,
It's-
okay.
That's the kind of stuff that ends up forming a sinkhole. Is
I
limestone
see.
formations wear away over time. Not a lot of avalanche. It's pretty flat in this area, and not a lot of
No
volcano,
volcano.
which is good. There's an elevated risk of crime in this area.
Yeah.
Different types, assaults and burglaries, as opposed to motor vehicles and robberies. There are no sex offenders within half a mile of this building, which is lovely.
That have registered.
That's
that have
really
re-
good news.
yeah, there may be sex offenders everywhere, but the
Right.
ones that have been registered by the state are not. There
Correct.
aren't any in
Correct.
this location. This neighborhood isn't very resilient to natural disasters, which means if something's happening, if there's a hurricane warning or something like that comes into town, then you best prepare yourself that town's not going to be able to help you out too much.
Okay.
They're not really geared for it. They'll
Right.
try their best, but you're not necessarily geared for it. But you do have very low noise, which is nice. So it's probably nice and quiet. Here's the points of interest: EV charging stations, childcare centers, public schools, airports. There's a lot of smaller airports around here. Stagecoach Hill, Arrow Valley, and Hillcrest are all within 4 miles. Toxic exposure, here's where we see issues with PFAS and with mold. So
Okay.
you want to look for obvious signs of mold, like is there
Right.
discolored walls? Are there waves in the walls that look like water may be trapped in there?
Okay.
And of course, are there in the bathrooms, mold lining the
Right.
bathtub? Let's see. We've got an underground storage tank a 1/4 mile away with the Texas Metro Mart. The leaching fields can go out to about 1,000 feet on those things if they're
Oh, okay.
leaking. There's not a ton you can do about it, but sometimes you want to know that it's there.
Okay.
There's a Superfund site about 3.5 miles away, which, again, pretty far.
Right.
And then we'll give you the closest sites to that. We'll tell you that the fire protection and response is pretty good here. You've got a fire hydrant within 250 feet, which is important for insurance. And you've got a number of them within 1,000 feet. You've got 3 stations within 5 miles, where Roanoke is one, Trophy Club Fire is the second.
Gotcha.
Good, and medical response is often tied to fire station response, and then you've got law enforcement response, which is here's where the fire stations and hospitals and police stations are located. So you got pretty good coverage in this area.
Yeah.
Which keeps it's good because it keeps them busy. Expected electrical costs based upon the square footage. Encore is your provider in this area. It'd be about $1,200 a year.
Okay.
If you want solar, it's going to take a while to pay back.
Right.
So you may or may not want to get solar for this location. With incentives, it's about 8 years. If your hold time on the property is 5 years, you might say, it's not worth it.
Okay.
Insurability. Hail is the risk here.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we've learned from our days in the insurance business is that most insurance companies do a pretty bad job of charging for hail.
Okay.
So as a result, premiums keep going up because they keep getting hit because they're not charging enough, and they just keep charging more, which is always fun and disappointing. And then if you want to get a quote, you can click here, get a quote.
Okay.
And then finally the timeline, which is like you would see on an auto report. Here's in by day, here's what we see. And that is a PropertyLens report for 255 Turner Avenue, number 201 in Roanoke, Texas.
That is really very thorough.
Yeah, you always run the risk of having too much information, but I kind of look at it like, clarity is better than mud.
Yes.
And at least now walking in, okay, I got a bunch of questions to ask about this place
Sure.
before I would ever consider investing in it. And the questions might be basic, but still you want to make sure that you ask them. And most people don't think to ask them.
Right.
Because they get intimidated or whatever it happens to be.
I think
So-
a practical step for the average home buyer or somebody that's not purchasing real estate very often might look at this and feel overwhelmed and feel like it's too much information. I am the kind of guy that says I don't think you can ever have too much information. You can get bogged down in it and not make decisions, and that's a bad thing. But I would recommend to just the average person out there, if they were to buy one of these reports, take the PDF, put it in Chat GPT and tell Chat GPT, tell me in plain language what all this means.
Yep.
And in 15 seconds, they'll have a report that a kindergartner could understand.
It's
That,
funny that you say that because that's on our development plan for next
oh, okay.
week
All right.
is to summarize that real clear at the top
Build that
because
in.
it does get it. But yeah, you can do it smarter and just drop it in to your favorite AI platform.
That's the one I use the most. I don't know that it's my favorite, to be honest. But anyway, that's a whole other topic.
Okay, so Alan,
Yeah.
based upon what you've seen here, what 3 things would you be looking for at 255 Turner Avenue in Roanoke, Texas?
Well, first thing I would be asking about, and having the inspector really dig deep into, is the roof. And on all of the buildings in that location, is this going to be an issue, especially because living in this area, I'm very aware of the recent storms we've had. We had about 3-inch hail a week ago. That's not yet on the report. And now I'm several miles from Roanoke, and it may have not been up there, but it was here. So that's a yellow flag in my mind, regarding the health of that roof. The second thing I would ask about is the water. That would be a big deal to me, especially knowing the client who's interested in this property. He grew up in uh, 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 a world where he kind of picked himself up by the bootstraps and has become more successful and done well for himself. And he has a real heart for people who are in low income communities. And one of the things that he wants to do in this next era of his life is to purchase and build properties that would be good housing and be a good landlord for people in low income areas. So I know that their physical health would be a top priority to him. So I'm definitely going to suggest to him dig deep into the water stuff there, and just make sure that if you want to be a good landlord, you want your people to have good water so they're not sick. And then the third thing I think that a big takeaway for me from that list is the potential infill question on the soil. I thought that was an interesting thing. There's many things on the list that I think definitely need to be touched on, but those would be my top 3.
Okay, John, if you were looking at investing in 255 Turner Avenue in Roanoke, Texas, what would your 3 main concerns be?
My first thing that I want to find out is all the permits, right? Is this a property? We know it's got multiple buildings on it, but does it really have multiple buildings on it? Or is it 5 separate properties sort of the same? Do they have one lot, but there's 5 different addresses? Whatever it happens to be that's causing things to go a little bit wonky. That would be my first thing, because it is a commercial property. And being a commercial property, we would want to, and typically would find, a lot more permits than you do on a typical residential property. A lot more enforcement on permits for commercial. So we know they're out there. It's just a question of where. Now, again, our system looked at this and said, you want a report, you have to stick in a number. So we were tying it to a unit so we could get a report on the general area and the property itself. But I would be calling up the permits and saying, hey, I'd like to get all of the permits for the following addresses, and do a deep dive on that.
That's a really good
Um,
insight.
The second thing is, you got to look at the roof. It's exposed. We know it's going to get hit. When they last replaced it, did they use some type of fortified shingle? Or did they do the quick repair special? What's going on there? Because while we only have 3 different aerials, in each one the roof appears to be in good shape, But then, of course, there's a corresponding thing that was bad that could have made the fact that, well, they're all new roofs. Because if it's the same color, you're not able to tell that there's been a discernible change in condition. And there should have
I see.
probably been some. So if they're replacing the roof every, 3-4 years, that's something you got to budget for. And something that your commercial insurer is probably going to know, and it's going to hit your rates. So that would be the second thing that I would take a look at. The third, uh, given the concern about being a good landlord, I would be looking to make sure that given the area, that the property has the appropriate cameras, has the appropriate, general protections for the residences, and the residents, to make sure that, as an outward sign, you get to see who's at your front door without opening it. You get to, we have security cameras on the building. We have security cameras that report to, a central location, um, hopefully never needing them. But, the whole joy of the alarm sign in front of your house is not to show everybody that you've got an alarm. It's to basically say to the person who's thinking about breaking in, go somewhere else that doesn't have a sign, right? And that's the signal you want to send, I think.
Okay. So if I were looking at investing in 255 Turner Avenue in Roanoke, Texas, I would look at the following three things. Number one, I would look at the foundation. Because of some of the soil runoff concerns, is the foundation exposed? Are there cracks? Is there anything visually that I can see that gives me some pause, because foundation fixes are expensive fixes? So that's the first thing, is the foundation. The second thing is the building permits. I would contact the local town. I would find out if there are building permits. Listen, we might just not have them. So I would look into what work has been built and permitted. Texas does have lax building codes. So there may not be any permits on there, in which case you have to ask what the repair schedule was on appliances and systems in the location. And then the third thing I would look at is mold. I would do a very heavy visual walk around for mold formation. Look at the bathtubs, look at the corners of the walls, look at, especially on the levels that are equated with the roof. Are there any signs of mold? And then if there looks like there are, then do a specific mold inspection, because it's tricky to find and it's really a pain in the neck to remediate. So those are the three things that I would look at. And Alan, how can people reach you? I love this Alan guy. How do they reach you?
The easiest way to find me is on my website, quantumfunding.co. Quantum simply means sudden and significant when you use it as an adjective. And so we like to make a sudden and significant difference in people's lives with the funding that we provide for real estate investors. So that's the first place. You can also find me on social media. All of my social media handles are quantumfunding.co. I'm on TikTok and Instagram and X and Facebook and LinkedIn. So you can definitely find me on those.
Cool. Any parting thoughts before we go, Alan?
Man, I think real estate is exciting. I think any business that is connected to real estate is exciting, because I think it is probably, at least in my opinion, and I'm not always right, but my opinion is that the best way to invest your money in something that doesn't fade is in real estate. Lex Luthor in the old Superman movie way back said, they're not making any more land. And that's an old saying that lots of people have thrown around. Real estate's great because they're never going to make more of it. We got what we got.
John, any parting thoughts?
If you're buying a property, you need a PropertyLens report.
There you
Oh,
go.
I would add, by the way, I'll never buy another property in my life without using this tool. This is phenomenal to me. I think the insight that it provides is, infinitely better than the money you spend on a Carfax. And I don't know anybody who buys a used car today without getting a Carfax report. I think everybody and their dog needs to use this tool.
It's self-preservation in action.
Yes.
And making sure, listen, you can fall in love with the property and all the bad stuff, but as long as you go in knowing that these are the things they're going to have to address, it's a much better process than if you're surprised by it down the line.
For sure.
So for this week's episode of Property of the Week, I am Bob Frady.
I'm John Siegman.
Thank you, Alan, for joining us today, and we'll see you again soon.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys.